We're in the Techcrunch studio today with Rob Coneybeer, co-founder and managing director of Shasta Ventures. Rob, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today, about what your venture capital firm is investing in, and then specifically go down into some of the blog posts you've recently written about the Internet of Things. But briefly to set the stage, tell me a little bit about why you started Shasta Ventures and what you guys are focused on.
Yeah, so big part of the reason that we started Shasta Ventures, and I started Shasta Ventures as a co-founder, is I didn't want to go through my career in Silicon Valley without starting something new. And I'd been at NEA for about 8 years. And together with my co-founders, we saw a real opportunity to bring consumer understanding together with core technology. And we saw that the adoption of technologies by end users is where the real future leading startups would be coming from.
Okay, and so what stage does Shasta focus on? Are you guys investing in seed, focusing on A, or doing a little bit broader?
We focus on Series A. We do some Series B, and we do seed opportunistically. But Series A is our sweet spot as a firm.
And so talk us a little bit about, when you form the firm, what are some of the key driving theses behind that?
Yeah.
And well, what are you looking at from an investment point of view?
Yeah, so from an investment point of view, the areas that we focus on today are, we focus on mobile, we focus on software as a service, and that's both to the enterprise markets and to consumers, and then consumer internet as well. And there are some themes within those areas that we find very interesting. And I think overriding all of it is that, as we all notice today, mobile is affecting absolutely everything. Within mobile, one of the areas that we find very interesting is what we think of as collaborative consumption. And that's the idea that you might have fixed assets like cars, such as relay rides that enables peer-to-peer car sharing. You could have people that have spare time or looking for odd jobs. That would be TaskRabbit, where we're a major investor in TaskRabbit. Liquid Space, which is about finding spare office space near you to use on an hourly, daily, weekly basis. We think that's a really powerful trend that's enabled by mobile. Other areas we find interesting right now include software as a service, next generation e-commerce. So there are some themes like that we're spending a lot of time with.
And so if we just dig in, to one piece of that in the collaborative consumption, how did you and your partners come up with that as a potential theme? And you guys have been very regimented about investing in that theme and done a number of investments. And just talk briefly about, how did you come to that idea?
Sure.
And then, what are some of the representative companies? You mentioned a few, but also some others as well. Give you a chance to talk about that.
One of the things that we think is very interesting about mobile is the first wave of mobile has been about what I would think of as self-contained applications. So that might be media, that could be gaming, et cetera. What we're particularly interested in is how mobile and applications, both as a distribution mechanism and as a way to reach consumers, can affect other industries and really disrupt those industries. So an example of that would be Cherry. And Cherry is a company where you have an application. It looks a lot like the Uber application, where you bring up the map, you put a push pin in the map where your car is, and you simply push a button that says, "Come and wash my car." We really like this because it disrupts an industry that's a $10 billion existing industry today. And it's taking something that wasn't possible before, reaching tens of millions of consumers rapidly to be able to scale an industry outside of mobile but adjacent to mobile.
Okay. And so if you're talking broadly about mobile applications and helping people interact in the real world, let's talk through, and you've written some blog posts about it, which I'm going to put into the post as well so people can read it, which I think are really interesting. But you're saying basically the first wave, right, is mobile-enabled technology or information.
Right.
Walk us through your thesis there.
Yeah, so first off, you might have games, and then second off, you have location-based applications. So if you think about Foursquare, for example, and a number of the applications that have come along that are location aware, and they can give you coupons, they can keep track of where you're going, they can help local merchants interact with those customers. That's very interesting, and it harnesses a lot of the sensors that are available in the smartphone, location being one of them, photography being another, Instagram being this huge recent success because it's harnessing this sensor that you have on the smartphone that's getting better and better and better, very high resolution, great photographs. So smartphones are one enabler of what we think of as the Internet of Things. The second enabler, which is being incorporated in the smartphone but is also being incorporated into devices, is sensor technology. And this is the idea that I can measure things in the real world and convert them into electronic information.
So here's a question I see a lot of entrepreneurs or people who are building applications think about. They say, oh, we can build this application and it leverages this sensor and that sensor and this sensor, right?
Right.
And it's usually kind of a trick. And then on the consumer end, people say, well, hey, you're draining my battery, or hey, you're plugging out my system. What have you seen as founders doing to leverage the right sensors in the right way?
I think typically they find something very specific. It's very simple. So I think Instagram is a great example of how they were able to leverage a very, very, very high quality imaging sensor that was available on iPhone 4, 4S, that leads people to create stunning images that other people want to interact with. And if you didn't have, say, one or two key sensors that you bring together, they wouldn't have had, I think, the uptake or the adoption that they've had.
And now, do you still think there are opportunities in the application layer for people to grab interesting data using any combination of those sensors?
I think where the really interesting opportunities will be going forward is taking sensors, but then taking action with those sensors. So if you look at something like the Nest Thermostat, for example, where we're an early Series A investor, it's packed with sensors. It's packed with motion sensors, temperature sensor, humidity sensor. It has a Zigbee radio built in, a Wi-Fi radio built in to connect to the internet. It can take in this information about, okay, I want to turn up the heat, I want to turn down the heat. It can tell whether the house is occupied or not. But where the magic is in these devices is marrying it with actuation. And the very fact that it's connected to the HVAC system means that device can take action and save you money by controlling the HVAC system and closing the loop.
So let's focus on this this Internet of Things, because this is something that I and other people probably see, written about here. Web 3.0 is about connecting devices or connecting phones to different devices. So how do you define Internet of Things?
I think of the Internet of Things as everything that connects to the internet that is not a PC, not a laptop, not a smartphone.
Okay.
It's all the other devices that connect to the internet and become more useful because they connect to the internet.
Now, would an example of this, an actuation or an actuator, be a service like IFT? Right. And so, what would you say to entrepreneurs out there who are looking at either building actuators or things? What would you want to see as an investor?
As an investor, what I'm particularly interested in is people that are thinking about the suite of sensors that are now available in smartphones. So that could be location, sound, light, et cetera, imaging, but then also looking at off-the-shelf actuators that are available. So rather than just creating the actuators, thinking about how they might be able to take action in the real world. This could be things like Nest, for example, the actuator being the solid-state temperature controls that they have built into the device. You think about something like Fitbit today. Fitbit is a sensor technology, but is there something that you can build into that device that would actually help people take action, that would be more of a feedback loop for people? Now, I don't think people would like a device that shocks them, but is there something that's able to close the loop out in the real world? I think is very interesting.
I think, I hear a lot of people, testing out Nike Fuel bands and Jawbone Up, and I think one or both of them offer some kind of vibration, right, or some kind of LED alerts. This is what you're saying, right? Is like, can some kind of technology
feedback, right,
give real world feedback?
Right.
And so, how do you see this playing out over the next, 2 to 3 years as you're looking at investments, potential investments coming in?
Well, I think what it leads to, and I think one of the waves that's coming is we have ubiquitous wireless coverage and smartphone capabilities. And with a touchscreen, it means it can be used as a controller, for example. You can start to control these devices that are around you. And sensors have become very cheap and ubiquitous. But with actuators and being able to move things in the real world, what you're really talking about is enabling a robotics industry going forward. And we're starting to see the vanguard of it. We see things like the Roomba that's more like a toy. But then you start to see things like, I almost think of them as toy drones. And the fact that...
Toy drones?
Toy drones. So if you think about aerial drones today, these military drones that cost millions of dollars, either of us could go out of this interview, go to a Toys R Us or a local shop, and buy a styrofoam plane that has a radio controller
Right.
packaged with it for $50 that we could fly around. And the same with the helicopter. These devices weren't available 5, 10 years ago, and they come built in with high definition HD camera that could have an hour of video on it. These things weren't capable before, and I think the next wave that you look at, which is a lot closer than any of us realizes, is the fully automated self-driving car. And the reason that that's enabled is you have very high quality, inexpensive machine vision, and most cars are now shipping with drive-by-wire actuators in them. So in a lot of cars, when you turn the steering wheel now, it's not hydraulically connected from the steering wheel down to the rack and pinion. There's actually a wire at some point in there where your steering input is translated into an electrical signal and then back through an electrical motor to actually steering the car. And subsystem after subsystem after subsystem in cars have been transferred over to these electrical actuators, and as a result, it's a very natural step to move to the fully automated autonomous car.
I see. So I guess the final question would be is, before we get to the autonomous car, and we're looking at sort of remote operated things, right? Things in the real world, whether it's a helicopter or a little plane drone or something like that. What are some interesting ways that you've seen people trying to do stuff today around that? I mean, it feels like I have seen these devices in stores as well, and they also offer, you know, controlling through a phone application. I mean, are we that close, or is it still a few years away?
I think we're getting remarkably close, and I think in some industries you can see that the toy industry starts to become an early indicator of where a lot of these technologies are headed. But I think it's still very nascent stages, and it's an area where I would encourage entrepreneurs to play around with stuff. A great example would be 3D printing today. 3D printing is becoming a lot cheaper because the materials technology to build up these three-dimensional devices in the printers is becoming a lot cheaper, more robust. And the actuators that you need to be able to actually move these devices around to build up these structures are becoming cheaper, more reliable, more efficient, and these are the enablers. So to answer your question directly about where they should be looking, one area that's really worth taking a close look at as an entrepreneur is what does 3D printing enable? Where are the opportunities?
Well, Rob, thanks for coming into the studio, and good luck.
Great. Thanks for having me.